I've had a few requests over the last few weeks to do a video on how I set up opposition instructions. And so today, in Understanding Football Manager, the A to Z, O is for opposition instructions. And we're going to take a look at the three things I do, and in particular when to add an instruction and when not to add an instruction. Let's go and kick some balls. Hello and welcome back to FM with Old Man Phil, and if you are a brand new visitor, I'm Phil and welcome to the channel. And today on the A to Z of Understanding Football Manager, we are looking at O for opposition instructions. And in the Norwich save that I have going on, we have a game coming up against Sheffield United, a game that we should easily win. And if we get our opposition instructions right, then it is a game that we should have very little problems in, and we should win comfortably. So what are we going to do? There are three stages that I'm going to go through in order to set this up. But before doing that, be aware that there are a couple of things that I don't do. I don't play pressing traps because I don't feel like I want to be forcing players onto stronger feet. I would rather not do that. And so rather than using pressing traps, I will treat each player as an individual. The idea that I am doing when I'm setting up opposition instructions is that I want to try and make players uncomfortable on the ball when I can, and I also want to nullify the main threats that they have on the pitch. So I'm not looking to set pressing traps. I'm not a great believer in those working particularly well in FM. I'm just going to treat them as individuals. And the second thing to remember is that you have to always consider the quality of your own team. And if you're not the greatest team in the world, then perhaps just a few opposition instructions might work better for you rather than having a whole pile of instructions for the team. Remember that it might be better for them just to focus on their own game rather than the game of the opposition. So if you're weaker than the opposition, perhaps limit them a little bit. But we're going to set up now for this game against Sheffield United, and the first thing I'm going to do is go to the Data Hub. And in the Data Hub, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm going to go and have a look at the summary. I'm going to have a look at how they play. They play a control possession style. And looking at their last game, they did complete a number of passes in the match. So they did pass the ball particularly well. They play short passing and a patient build-up. And through that passing style, they did create a lot of opportunities, but unfortunately their finishing was poor and they lost the game by 1-0. So we know how they're going to play, and we know they are a good passing team. So we're now going to have a look at the analyst report for them. And when the analyst report finally decides to arrive, then we can see there are a few positives. That possession is the number one thing that they do, and they defended very well from attacks from the left. So we know that about them. But what I'm really looking for are things that I can use, and I can see that Youssouf Amour lost possession more than any other player, and that's really a piece of information that I can use. And so one of the targets for this team might be Youssouf Amour if he plays. And the final thing in the Data Hub I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a look at their last match passing map. And I can clearly see that this Owen Morris is probably the outlet for the goalkeeper. It may or may not be as yet that I want to do something with him. He tends to pass it out left to his fullback Fred Dixon outside him. But also there is an outlet from the other centre-back, but I can see that the way they play is concentrated down both flanks. There's very little happening through the middle of the pitch. And then finally what I'm going to go and do is I'm going to have a look at their scout report, and we'll have a look at the scout report that has come in for me. I'm looking for players who are playing well, and I'm looking for players who are out of form, and I can see that there's nobody really that's actually in great form. Andy Ellis, who's a goalkeeper, has been in good form of late, probably because they've been under a lot of pressure. And they have a lot of negatives and weaknesses in their side. And I'm looking for worst player. Tazimata has been struggling up front, but they are playing Rasmussen up front at the moment, and so their strikers are not in the best of form at the moment. Rasmussen also is not in very good form, so their finishing is not great, and that helps me a lot when I go back now to my opposition instructions. Okay, stage 1 is done. Now we're going to move on to the second thing that I'm going to do, and that is to set up as if I was the best team in the world, and I'm going to look at each one of these players and look at each 4 of these different areas and try to make life as uncomfortable for them as you can. Well, let's start with show onto weaker foot. Now what I'm going to do is go through each one of these players, and all I'm going to do is look for players who have a weak or a very weak foot. And then if they have a weak or very weak foot, I'm going to show them onto that foot. That's because they don't want to play on that foot, and they're going to feel very uncomfortable if they're forced to use that foot, and maybe will make some terrible errors as well. And at the end of all that, you can see that there is only one. It's only the goalkeeper who has a weak foot or a very weak foot, and he is very weak on his left foot. So instruct your players to show him to his weaker foot when they get a chance. So now we'll move on to hard tackling, or staying off the tackles, and when you might want to do that. So if we were the best team in the world, we're going to go through each and every one of these players and figure out whether or not to hard tackle them. And in particular, I'm going to be looking not at tackling, I'm going to be looking at their strength, and I'm going to be looking at their agility, I'm going to be looking at their bravery, and then possibly looking at their tackling. I'm also going to consider their aggression as well, and also their decisions. When I make these decisions, I have to get these right. And so looking at this player, Owen Morris, he's got 13 strength, he's quite strong, he's very brave, he's not really aggressive, but he can tackle. And so I don't think there's really any point in actually hard tackling him. And if we go through them one by one, if we have a look at Dixon on the other side, he's not very strong. He's quite brave and he's quite aggressive, but he's not strong. He also lacks pace. And so I think that he might be worth just having a hard tackle on because of the fact that he's not very strong. So we'll go back and we will put Dixon down as a hard tackle, and I'll go through each and every one of these players just as we did with the others. And so at the end of that, we have 3 players that we've identified who we think it's a good idea to hard tackle. And if we take an example of one of these players, if we look at Emil Rasmussen, for example, he's not that strong for a forward. He lacks aggression, he's not very brave, and he doesn't concentrate very well. There's a lot of weaknesses in his game, and his tackling's not good. As our centre-backs are going to be fairly good at tackling, I think giving him a hard tackle will be a good idea. And so we've gone through all of those. So now the difference between tight marking and a trigger press. A trigger press is basically closing down space once a player has the ball. Tight marking is simply having a player near to your target so that he doesn't have the space, so that somebody's already on top of him when he receives the ball. That limits the time that he has available for him to make his next move. So tight marking is basically having someone there already, and trigger pressing is closing down the space once he has received the ball. And there's a number of things that you need to consider when you're thinking about tight marking now or trigger pressing. So somebody who has a very weak left foot and also can be put under pressure would be a good candidate for closing down or trigger press, and also showing onto the weaker foot. This would make them feel very uncomfortable indeed. So those two things work together well where you can apply them. And so now we're going to go through the team and we're going to have a look at who we should type mark and who we should apply a trigger press to. Well, if we're going to look at a trigger press, let's look at this defender. The first thing that I want to do is to look at the pace that they have. I'm concerned with two things, pace and dribbling. If they have good pace and they have good dribbling, the last thing in the world I want to do is to be trigger pressing them, because they will have an ability, especially if they have good agility and balance, they're going to have an ability to skip past my player unless he has very good attributes in the world of closing down. And so as we are just going to be treating this as a we are the best team in the world situation at the beginning, he doesn't have the greatest of pace. My fullbacks should be able to cope with that, and my winger should be able to cope with that. He's not very aggressive, his decisions are poor, and so I think he would probably be a good candidate to close down. And so for this fullback Owen Morris, we'll mark him down as closing down. For Fred Dixon, he has no pace at all and very little in terms of dribbling skills, so he looks to me like a perfect candidate to close him down. To when he gets the ball, to deny him the space, to fill that space as quickly as possible and then hard tackle him. And that way we should be able to take him out of the game or stop him being effective within the game. And so we would go through all of these exactly the same. And in midfield is where you're typically going to find the more expressive, the more creative players in the team. You're looking at the two midfielders and the attacking midfielder. If they are highly creative players, then what you don't want to do is allow them any space at all. You want to have somebody on top of them in order to stop them, to limit the time for them to be creative. If they're not very creative players and they are ball carriers instead, then close them down. Probably a better idea to close them down, unless they have great pace and dribbling. And so the more creative players, type mark them. If they're not that particularly creative, then just close them down. And so we'll have a look at these two DMs. Sousa is the first one. He looks like he's the more creative of the two, so we will type mark him. He doesn't have a great deal of pace and his dribbling's not spectacular, but we do want to stop him spraying the ball around, and so we will type mark Sousa. And then I want to look at Mbala. Mbala, as you can see, is a more defensive-minded midfielder. You can see that straight away with his mentals. He's a very decent player in terms of his defensive capability, but he's not the most creative player in the world. He doesn't dribble very well. He hasn't got a great deal of pace, so I think probably the best thing for him is to close him down, and that will take him out of the game pretty nicely. And then moving on to the attacking midfield, he generally tends to be a very creative player, and you can see in this case he has great vision, great flair. And so, like the central midfielder who might be creative, we want to type mark him, and that is probably the best way to take him out of the game, is to deny him space within which to work and to find other players. And we'll do the same for Almeida, who is a winger now. He has pace, good pace, and he has a reasonable right foot. But I think that he is probably one of those players that at this point in time I'm going to do nothing with. And finally, Emil Rasmussen, who is their striker. He does have pace. He's got 15 pace, 15 acceleration. He's got good agility, good balance, and he's quite tall. And although he's not that great in the air, and our central defenders should be able to take care of him, doesn't have the best finishing. He's not the most composed player, and his concentration is pretty poor. He's not very aggressive. In fact, he's probably not someone who's going to be much of a threat. But just in case that he has one of those days, we're going to type mark him anyway. He's a kind of player that we can just type mark. Wherever he happens to go, the player who is nearest to him has the ability at the back to be able to take him out of the game. However, there may be things that we need to tweak a little bit, and we might need to tweak them because of the players in our own team. we have to consider now, having made these adjustments to their team and given our players these instructions, we now need to make sure that we have the players who are capable of doing that. So the third stage is to have a look at whether our own team are able to carry out these instructions. Do we have the players in these areas of the pitch who are going to be able to hard tackle? Showing onto the weaker foot will require that a player has the ability, the pace and the aggression to put someone under pressure, to press enough to show him onto the weaker foot. Do we have these players in these areas who are capable of doing that? Well, Owen Morris is a right fullback, and so let's have a look at our left winger. And so Sawyer is not the best person when it comes to closing someone down. He's not very aggressive, he's not very brave, he doesn't concentrate very much. He's an attacking player rather than a defending player. However, he does have a good work rate and he works well as a team. He does have acceleration and he does have pace. And he does have a fair amount of stamina for this level. So he could close down at a pinch. And so he is probably a good player to actually say, yes, close down this fullback. The most important thing is that he has acceleration, and we know that the fullback is quick, and so he'll be able to use that acceleration in order to perform that job. If he didn't have the acceleration, I might be thinking, nah, I don't want him to be closing down the fullback. It will be a waste of his energy, it will be a waste of time, and the fullback will often be able to get past him and use the space then that's available behind him. So we know we have the player capable of doing that. And their left back, if we have a look at who's going to be looking after their left back, we have Zaprapoulis. Now Zaprapoulis does have good strength, but unfortunately he's not very brave and he's not very aggressive. Now this may lead to him not actually carrying out his duty from time to time, but as a winger he does have tackling of 11 and therefore he can tackle. So we just want to have a quick look at that left back again, and we're looking in particular at his strength, which is poor, and his aggression. I think they're a fairly good match. I think that if Zaprapoulis is asked to go and tackle him, he's not going to have any reservations. Zaprapoulis also has the pace to be able to close him down quite effectively. So that is pretty decent. This is one of the areas that I might have problems with. Sousa is a defensive mid on the right, and he will be looked after by Matic here on our left. And Matic is a very aggressive player. He's quite strong, he's quite brave. He's not very brave, but he's brave enough. He's very determined. He's a creative player rather than a tackler. And so basically, is he going to be able to do the job of marking Sousa? Probably not. His marking is not very good. He is much more able to press Sousa than he is to mark him. So what I might be thinking of here is, instead of tight marking Sousa, given who I have in that position, I might now change that to closing him down. We also know now that Sousa's left foot is reasonable. We know that Matic is good at closing down, so we'll turn him on to his left foot. So we'll change that now from tight marking to closing down, based on the knowledge we have of the players that are in those positions for us. In terms of closing down Mbala, he will be in a zone with Flores. Flores is a highly aggressive player. He's very good at closing down, good work rate. He has enough acceleration and pace to do the job. He's very brave, very determined, makes good decisions, good concentration. He's very composed. He has the mentals to be able to do that closing down job. He is also very adept at marking and has good anticipation to help him do that. But I think, as we have identified identified that we want Mbala closed down, I think that Flores is a very, very decent prospect to be able to close him down. No need to change that. We need to just look at his foot, and we're going to turn him onto his left foot as well, simply because we have the player who's capable of doing that in his area of the pitch. In terms of the wingers, we have to look at our fullback. We've identified that we want to hard tackle Hambury. We just want to have a quick look at our left back, Kamara, who is decent at tackling, and he is aggressive. He's quite strong. He's got good acceleration and pace. He's got very, very good mentals, so I think he will be capable of tackling hard on the right-hand side. We just need to know that Jarmot can be marked properly. Well, I'm at the moment, because we will be outnumbered in midfield from time to time, I'm not going to allocate anybody to him, but I think if we have a look at Flores is very good at marking, and Ley is very good at marking, and also Bonilla is excellent at marking. So whatever space that he wanders into, somebody is going to be able to mark him very nicely. And then Almeida, I hadn't decided to do anything on Almeida because he was simply looking too dangerous at the time we were setting him up. But we have to have a look now at who we've got at right back. And if we have a look at our right back, Muntian is exceptional. He's very aggressive. He's definitely someone who can close down. He's got good acceleration, good pace. I think we can be closing down that winger. Even though he does tend to have pace, I think that Almeida could match him for pace, and he's more aggressive, he's stronger, and I think that Muntian would actually do a very good job on him. So I think we can go back to him now, and we can say we'll close him down, and if he has a weaker foot, which is his right foot, we can then turn him onto his right foot. And so by looking at the players who are in those roles, we've actually changed the instructions from what we originally set up. And now I think we've got a very nice balanced looking set of opposition instructions. And I think that if we play well enough, then I think we will do a very good job on them. They will create very little, and we'll go on and win the game. And if you want to know the result of this Sheffield United fixture, then why not tune in tomorrow for episode 35 of the current Norwich save. I don't want to spoil it for those who are already following along. But hopefully, even if you don't follow along, you've got an insight into how I set up opposition instructions. And for those who've asked for this video, I hope that it's been adequate. If you do have any questions or any feedback you'd like to give, then please by all means leave the questions or comments in the comments section below. I always answer questions, and I always reply to all comments. And all that remains to be said now is to say thank you very much for coming along and supporting the channel and supporting the British Heart Foundation. And if you have enjoyed it, don't forget, leave us a like on your way out. And all that remains to be said now is take care, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode.